Bennie Thompson issued a blunt warning to DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, and he did it with a calm intensity that instantly shifted the energy of the entire hearing. The moment he began speaking, you could feel the change, like everyone in the room suddenly realized this wasn't going to be another routine oversight session. He didn't warm up, didn't circle around the issue, didn't play to the cameras. He went straight to the heart of the crisis unfolding inside the Department of Homeland Security, and the first minute of his remarks set a tone that the rest of the hearing couldn't escape.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding today's hearing on oversight of the Department of Homeland Security. Congressional Republicans' oversight of the Trump administration has been dismal this Congress. Republicans have had administration witnesses before this committee the fewest times in any recent administration's first year. Most of that was on the watch of the prior chairman, who was, to my favorite phase of his, derelict in his duty to bring Trump administration officials before the committee. This hearing is a step in the right direction. The Trump administration has created serious issues at TSA, CISA, and DHS S&T that need to be addressed. Committee Democrats are committed to taking a hard look at those issues, from President Trump's slashing the CISA workforce to Secretary Kristi Noem's unlawful rescinding union rights for frontline transportation security officers, to the administration cutting programs that leverage university-based research to address critical homeland security challenges. But none of those things can be the sole focus of our oversight right now, because President Trump and Secretary Noem have weaponized DHS against the American people and are wreaking havoc in Minneapolis and other communities across this country. It's an absolute disgrace that ICE isn't here today in wake of the shooting death of Renee Good at the hands of an ICE agent. Mr. Chairman, as you know, I've asked for ICE Acting Director Lyons to appear at today's hearing. I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record my letter to you dated January 14th, 2026, requesting Acting Directors Lyons appear before the committee without delay. I want to thank you for issuing that invitation, but committee Democrats and I are outraged that ICE refused to appear today. Ms. Good was a wife, mother of 3 young children, a devout Christian, and a U.S. citizen. We all seen the shooting video with our own eyes. Ms. Good certainly did not deserve to be killed by her own government. She should be alive today. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I ask for a moment of silence in memory of Renee Good. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, in the wake of Ms. Good's killing, ICE has an obligation to appear and answer members' questions. Her tragic killing needs to be thoroughly investigated, and everyone involved, from the ICE officer who pulled the trigger to the president and secretary who sent them to Minneapolis, must be held accountable. DHS also needs to be held accountable for its out-of-control immigration operation, creating chaos in communities like Los Angeles, Chicago, New Orleans, and Minneapolis, terrorizing people from all walks of life and hurting U.S. citizens and immigrants alike. Mr. Chairman, in order to ensure that ICE appears before the committee, pursuant to Clause 2J1 of House Rule 11, I'm providing you with a letter signed by every Democratic member of the committee requesting testimony from Acting Director Lyons. I ask unanimous consent that this Minority Day letter be submitted for the record. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I understand that you intend to hold a series of oversight hearings with DHS officials. I look forward to ICE being before the committee at our next hearings. Democrats insist on that. Never has oversight and accountability been more necessary than it is now. President Trump and Secretary Noem are doing real damage to this country and to the department that was stood up in the wake of 9/11 to protect Americans from future attacks. Unfortunately, President Trump and Secretary Noem have established a corrupt, above-the-law culture at DHS, and Noem has enriched herself and her allies at taxpayers' expense. She has awarded multiple no-bid contracts to close associates and siphoned $240 million of taxpayers' money to companies connected to her top advisor and close confidant, Corey Lewandowski, as well as to her spokesperson husband. She fast-tracked a contract worth almost $1 billion to a company led by a Trump donor, and she's living rent-free in the U.S. Coast Guard housing designated for military members. She has also abused her power as secretary. She's acknowledged cherry-picking, which court orders departments will comply with, contrary to the rule of law. She's used access to disaster funds to punish political foes, illegally withholding congressionally authorized disaster funds. She has obstructed congressional oversight, barring members from visiting ICE detention facilities and refusing to respond to oversight letters and requests. In short, she has enriched herself, abused the power of her office, obstructed congressional oversight, and violated her oath of office to the Constitution. Never has oversight of the Department of Homeland Security been more important, and never has holding an administration accountable been more necessary. Be assured that accountability is coming. Accountability is coming, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
From the very first words, it felt like something explosive was about to be exposed. He started by making it clear that oversight wasn't just a procedural responsibility, it was a necessity, because the public had questions, lawmakers had questions, and the department's recent actions demanded answers. Thompson said the stakes weren't abstract or theoretical, they were painfully real, and the proof was in Minneapolis, where a mother of three, Renee Good, lost her life during an ICE operation that left the nation stunned. And somehow, even after that tragedy, ICE refused to send a single representative to appear before Congress. That, Thompson warned, was unacceptable. It showed a kind of disregard for accountability that shook even veteran members of the committee. But it wasn't only the refusal that angered him, it was the silence. A deadly incident had occurred, a family was grieving, a community was shaken, and DHS, one of the largest agencies in the federal government, chose not to face questions. That decision alone made Thompson's warning even heavier. He said transparency was not optional, and when an agency tasked with protecting the public instead shields itself from scrutiny, something is deeply wrong. The start of the hearing felt less like a conversation and more like the opening statement in a case building toward consequences. He spoke about Renee Good in a way that made the story personal, not political. She wasn't just a headline, she was a mother, a wife, a Christian, and an American citizen whose life ended during a government operation. Thompson reminded the room that the incident wasn't speculation or rumor, the video was public. Everyone had seen it, and everyone knew that Good wasn't a threat deserving lethal force. Her death, he said, was preventable, and the refusal of ICE to testify made it impossible for Congress to evaluate what went wrong. That's when Thompson called for a moment of silence, and in that rare heavy pause the entire hearing shifted again. No one moved, no one whispered, even the air in the room felt different. When Thompson resumed speaking, his words carried even more weight, because the committee had just acknowledged the gravity of what happened, and he didn't let the moment pass quietly. He said Good's death must be investigated fully, from the officer who pulled the trigger to the senior leaders who authorized and directed the operation, but even that wasn't the full picture. Thompson said what happened in Minneapolis was just one example of a pattern that had grown too large to ignore. He said DHS operations in major cities were becoming chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerously aggressive. Communities that once felt safe described being caught in sudden enforcement sweeps that seemed designed more to intimidate than protect. Thompson noted that the department's strategy didn't feel coordinated or focused on public safety. It felt like something else entirely, something that lawmakers feared was being shaped by political motives rather than national security. He pointed to the collapse of internal workforce capacity in critical areas such as cybersecurity and science research. He said essential program funding had been slashed at the same time that more controversial enforcement actions had expanded. Thompson emphasized that he and other committee members had repeatedly asked for explanations and documentation, only to be met with silence or obstacles. He said DHS was drifting into dangerous territory, large enough to impact millions of people but evasive enough to avoid basic oversight. That's when he shifted directly to the allegations against the secretary, and the room tightened. Thompson didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to dramatize the moment. Instead, he described the claims the way an investigator lays out findings, measured, methodical, and deeply troubling. He said multiple no-bid contracts had been awarded to individuals with direct personal ties to the secretary. One set of contracts, totaling about $240 million, reportedly went to companies connected to a longtime advisor and to the secretary's spokesperson's husband. Another contract, rushed through approval and approaching $1 billion, allegedly went to a company led by a political ally. And while these claims were still being examined, Thompson said the pattern was too clear to dismiss. He stressed that Congress had a responsibility to determine whether taxpayer dollars were being misused, misdirected, or exploited for personal gain. Then he raised another issue that had circulated through media reports and internal whistleblower messages, that the secretary had been living rent-free in Coast Guard housing intended for active duty service members. Thompson said the arrangement raised ethical concerns that could not be ignored, especially at a time when junior service members were struggling to afford housing of their own. He said the department needed to explain how and why such privileges were extended, and whether they were standard practice or special access granted through unofficial channels. After listing the ethical concerns, Thompson moved to something even more alarming. He said the secretary had publicly acknowledged choosing which court orders DHS would obey. That statement, he warned, went beyond controversial policy choices. It suggested a disregard for the judicial system itself. A department deciding which laws to enforce and which orders to ignore isn't following the Constitution, it's operating in defiance of it. Thompson said the practice, if confirmed, threatened the foundation of lawful governance, but the pattern, he explained, went further. Thompson said disaster relief funds, money meant to help states recover from fires, floods, storms, and other emergencies, were being withheld or delayed for reasons that didn't appear to align with standard criteria. Some governors, he noted, reported rejections of urgent requests without receiving any meaningful explanation. Thompson didn't accuse the secretary of using disaster aid to reward allies or punish critics, but he made it clear that the timing and circumstances had raised serious questions, and the fact that DHS refused to cooperate with oversight only made those questions louder. Then he addressed the obstruction directly. Thompson said members of Congress had been denied entry to ICE detention facilities, something he described as unheard of. He said DHS had repeatedly ignored oversight letters, delayed responses, or refused to provide basic documentation. Thompson argued that an agency unwilling to be examined should not be trusted with sweeping authority, and that Congress could not let such behavior continue. At this point, Thompson presented something symbolic but powerful, a letter signed by every Democratic member of the committee, demanding that the acting ICE director testify at the next available hearing. He said this wasn't just a formality. It was a unified statement that the committee would proceed with oversight with or without DHS cooperation. He emphasized that Congress had the authority, the mandate, and the obligation to compel answers. Then came the warning. Thompson said DHS leadership must understand that evasion is no longer a viable strategy. He made it clear that the committee would continue pressing forward, and that accountability, whether delayed, avoided, or resisted, was inevitable. He said the department had been allowed to operate without adequate scrutiny for too long, and the consequences were showing up in real communities where people were frightened, uncertain, and increasingly distrustful of federal actions. As he spoke about the erosion of public trust, he returned again to the death of Renee Good, reminding the committee that the tragedy was not an isolated incident but a symptom of something larger. He said DHS had been given extraordinary powers in the past, but those powers carried extraordinary responsibility. When an agency with that reach misuses authority or shields itself from oversight, the public loses its sense of safety.
Chase.
He said the committee's responsibility wasn't just to investigate the past, it was to protect people in the future. Thompson's closing remarks weren't loud or theatrical, they were steady, heavy, and final. He said DHS needed to restore trust, it needed to respect the law, and it needed to cooperate with Congress, because if it didn't, the committee would use every tool available to ensure accountability. He let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the line that stayed with everyone. Accountability is coming. Those words echoed through the hearing room, not as a threat, but as a certainty. They marked a turning point in the oversight relationship between DHS and Congress. And even though the secretary wasn't sitting there, the message reached her office instantly. The public heard it, the media heard it, and lawmakers on both sides knew the next hearings would be even more significant. The hearing ended, but the ripple effect didn't. Questions spread. Commentators debated whether DHS had grown too powerful. Analysts wondered whether enforcement decisions were being shaped for reasons beyond public safety. And across the country, people affected by raids, detentions, or delayed emergency responses looked to Congress for answers. Thompson's warning wasn't a closing statement, it was the opening chapter of a larger fight, a fight about transparency, about authority, about how a department meant to protect Americans had drifted into territory that frightened the very people it was supposed to serve. And the deeper Congress digs, the more intense the next chapters will become. If you want more breakdowns of major hearings, political confrontations, and the stories shaping national headlines, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps us uncover the moments that matter, and trust me, what's coming next will be even more revealing.